You are listening to Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast. Is our house falling down? You decide. Today we're going to talk about the fall of the House of Usher, the recent Mike Flanagan Netflix series, maybe some other Flanagan stuff. He's sort of been ruling things over there for a little while. Maybe some other things about Edgar Allan Poe and his adaptations. Who knows? This is Mark Linsenmeyer. I'm not at all bothered by the thumping that seems to be coming from under the floorboards. Don't let it worry you.
I'm Al Baker, just definitely not as good as the sum of my parts.
I'm Sarahlyn Bruck, and I've got this really nice wine I'd like to show you in my basement. Just a little further.
And my name is Lawrence Ware, and I think that Edgar Allan Poe is a wonderful narrative writer, but a terrible poet.
Comes out swinging. Geez, Lawrence.
So I guess that's the first question is Poe in the abstract. Is he worthy at this point? Is he still in vogue? Are people still?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Did Lovecraft take the mantle?
Of course not. No, Lovecraft is incredibly racist. But no, Edgar Allan Poe is a really, really important writer. I think he's a really good narrative writer. But listening to the characters in Fall of the House of Usher look earnestly in the camera and recite the poetry of Edgar Allan Poe, that was very hard to deal with. It really drove home for me. This guy is not a good poet, but the stories he tells, the way he tells them, top notch. Really, really important writer, really good writer.
Absolutely agree with you about the show, but I think it just shows what makes Edgar Allan Poe so good. And the show didn't quite understand. Well, it seemed to understand in the first part of it, which is that Poe doesn't take himself too seriously.
No, he doesn't.
So he's not like a great literary poet. He writes doggerel, but I think what Poe shows is that there's such a thing as good doggerel. And you're right, it was ridiculous when the show was trying to make the characters recite Poe in a way that was deep and meaningful, because Poe's supposed to be fun. And the show was at its best when it understood that Poe was supposed to be fun.
I agree. I think the show was having a lot more fun. It looked like it might have been a lot more fun to make than it was necessarily to watch. It was a big swing. It was definitely a big swing. That's a hard task to bring in all of these stories and poems. But I really love Poe as a poem. I think he is someone who is master at language. Every single word that he chooses with care. Josh and I were just talking about The Raven, actually. And just going over that first line of The Raven is a beautiful thing. But listening to people recite poetry in the show seemed a little bit ridiculous.
I'm sorry. I gotta fight Sarah. We are already going to fight Sarah. Sarah, Poe is a really good poet if you are in high school. He's a really good poet to learn his poetry because he's very rhymey, timey kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. It's really fun to say.
He is wonderful to say. There's no formal rigor and really interesting. Come on, Sarah. Sarah, you are a writer. I need you to come on, Sarah. Come on.
I am a writer.
Come on, Sarah. You like his poetry?
I do like his poetry. I love his short stories, but I do like his poetry.
His short stories are great. His poetry is so bad.
Why do you say that? Why do you think it's bad?
It's very rhymey. There's nothing going on with the structure of the poems that he writes that's interesting. It's very base poetry. It's interesting subject matter, but him as a poet, as an innovator on the art, he's nothing to write home about.
It's like emo music. He's like poetry's version of emo music, or like Fall Out Boy or something. It's good for what it is. He's not trying to be, John Donne or whoever.
He's not trying to be Keats, no.
He's not trying to be William Blake or something, but he's also, it's an extension of his stories. Like, he does such a great job with language and mood and vibe. And, he is the one writer who just looks at the self. There's nobody better than Poe at looking at the self. He stares right at himself in the mirror, just like William Wilson did. And there's nobody better at that than him.
He's really good at the subject. He's really good at the content, but at being a poet, because when I think about a poet, I think about more than just like the stuff that they're doing. I think about the formal structure. I think about what they're doing with language and whatnot. He is really good at storytelling. He's good at short stories. He's good at telling stories, good at mood and evoking a feeling. But as a poet, he is fine.
But
Right. So
poetry is also
fine.
questioning. Sorry, one more thing. But
Go ahead.
poetry is also questioning who we are as human beings. And I think that's essentially Poe. And he does that in The Raven. He does that in Annabelle Lee. He does that constantly over and over and over again. And I think he's, as you put it, Al, an emo poet. But at the same time, it evokes something in the reader. There's a reason why we're still reading him today.
Yeah, just the role that poetry had in culture for a long damn time until recorded music really came around to replace that. He does an equally good job in The Raven establishing a mood. There's a reason that he's just been memeified. And that's what I think of this adaptation is just a collection of, you remember this thing from high school? Do you remember? You've heard this image of a pendulum, right? Not a lot to actually do with the short story, The Pit and the Pendulum, but there's a pendulum involved, and that's pretty much all you need. So it's a collection of images, and the poetry did just as much to contribute to that with Annabelle Lee and The Raven as the prose. So if that's all we want out of it is a mood. So we have a mood. And then let me ask you specifically. So I just listened to the story, The Fall of the House of Usher again. Very little actually happens in that story.
Very little.
Yeah. It's pretty spare.
Why would you even want to adapt this? And I can see why if they decided to adapt it and to adapt it into more than a movie, you'd have to do something like they did here. But again, this is just a collection. It's a remix of a bunch of themes from Poe rather than an adaptation at all.
The core approach I thought was really smart. They did probably the best. I can't think of a better way to approach adapting tales of mystery and imagination, which is what they set out to do. And you're right. The story, The Fall of the House of Usher, does not support anything like a series worth of TV. But what it does provide is a really good metaphorical hook to hang the show around.
That's good.
And
That's
they ran with that really, really well. And I thought some of the Black Cat at that episode stood out to me as the one that was most like a one-for-one retelling of the actual story. A lot of the others, you're right. The show also did a really good job of rewarding very clever boys and girls who had done their homework in high school and remembered the vague outline of the plot of some of these stories.
All these Easter eggs. I have to show you. I was able to get out my old Norton anthology.
Oh, crap. Look at that. I haven't seen that in years.
I know.
My goodness.
I know. All my notes are in here.
Really?
What did you think about Poe when you were a student?
She loved him. She loved him. I
Yes.
know she did. I know she did.
Yes, I did. I did.
I think that The Fall of the House of Usher, I had forgotten what was going on in that story, so I went back and listened to, I actually bought I forgot what I bought. It had a whole bunch of Poe stuff in there, and it reminded me how little it was going on in that story. So what Mike Flanagan did, and he tends to do this well in all of his stories, in all of his shows, is he found a really good framework to kind of put
exactly
up, and then he placed different things from Poe inside of it. He modified it a little bit. To be honest, I thought he was quite clever. I might be the highest of all of us on this show. I really enjoyed this show quite a bit. It's not as good as Midnight Mass, but it's right there for me, at least. But he does a pretty good job of modernizing what Poe is up to, bringing up to where we are now, and kind of playing with it and just having fun. I thought that The Pit and the Pendulum was really interesting. That Telltale Heart
was my favorite. Yeah.
That's an old story that I remember, and I remember being kind of creeped out by it, but this was a really interesting kind of spin on it. The Black Cat I thought was really ingenious. I thought that this was quite good. I really enjoyed what Mike Flanagan was up to, and I'm kind of happy to see that he's playing with form like this and kind of pushing horror forward while at the same time remaining true to what Poe was all about.
I'd never seen anything by Mike Flanagan before Usher. Do you think this was a good introduction to his stuff? It kind of made me wanted to go back and watch some of his other
It's pretty
stuff.
atypical. Most of his is heavier.
Oh, really?
I don't know. Dr. Sleep is really, really good. It's really one of the best movies.
That's not his brainchild. That's
It's
just
really
it's
good.
Just,
well, it kind of. Come on, it kind of.
well, I guess this is the question that he's well known for doing these adaptations. And so he reflects the mood generally of what the original was. This one purposefully was more campy, more you're cheering for the deaths, more comical. Whereas Midnight Mass, the other one that I watched just in preparation for this, it's very different. There's some real, actually pretty good theological discussion and a lot of
it's a meditation.
I committed, a drunk driving thing. This is the premise of the whole thing. And now my life is shit. And so like just starting in that place and taking it really seriously. Okay.
I mean, to be honest, Mike Flanagan is very similar to Stephen King in many ways. He's very interested in similar themes. The pacing of his, I guess, TV shows is similar to Stephen King, although his movies are a little bit different. Like, if you want a Mike Flanagan primer, I would say, honestly, A Ouija Part 2, that's one of his films. It is so much better than it has any right to be. It is a surprisingly really good movie. I liked Hush quite a bit. I thought that was good. Gerald's Game, I didn't love it, but people tend to love that movie for some reason. That's on Netflix. Midnight Mass is really good. And also The Haunting of Hill House, the first of
that's
the
on
TV
Netflix,
shows.
right?
That's on Netflix. That is really, really good. And that is scary. It is really creepy because in The Haunting of Hill House, he has ghosts all over the frame, but they're all in the background to kind of give you the impression that ghosts are like haunting these people.
Oh my
It's
God.
a really good film. It's a really creepy film, but it's so good and the acting is top notch. So Mike Flanagan is really one of the best horror filmmakers working right now. It's just that he made this pivot away from making films. The last film he made was, I believe, Dr. Sleep. And he made this pivot towards making these TV shows for Netflix. Now moving forward, he's going to make these TV shows for Amazon. But I hope he gets back to making films really soon.
With Usher, one thing that I wasn't loving about this was that it was just seemed like nobody except for the granddaughter was redeemable. It was, you're like rooting for all of these kills. And once you get what the framework of the story is going to look like, you kind of can predict, or at least from my watching experience, I could predict kind of everything that was going to happen. Just about. I don't know. I wondered what was the point of bringing in this Sackler-esque family to stand in as the ushers. Like, what was the point of all of that, do you think?
I mean, to be honest, I think that Mike Flanagan is really mad about what happened with the Purdue pharmaceutical company. And he's very upset with that family that's behind that. He's very upset with all the wreckage that happened because of Oxycodone. And so he's kind of doing this like wish fulfillment, like making them suffer. And that's part of what I think he was up to, is that he was drawing on his anger and how frustrated so many people are. They're never going to have any kind of repercussions for the decisions that they made. And so he made them suffer on television. That might be just my reading of it, but that's kind of what I felt like he was doing.
I kind of thought one of the places the series struggled was with making the conceit pay off at the end. So I kind of felt the same way as Sarahlyn. It felt a little weird, like time every single episode waiting for the kill. And if you kind of know the story that the episode's named after, you also kind of know what's going to happen. I really like that experience generally. I like it when a TV show or a movie is an adaptation and like telegraphs to you that it's going to be following some of the same themes or some of the same story. And then the fun for you is in seeing like how it does that, how it hits the beats, what it changes. And a lot of the time the show managed that quite well, but it's 8 times over the course of a series is a lot of times for that to have to carry the show. And I think the way they tied it all together with the, I guess, are we doing a spoiler alert? Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert moving forward. Spoiler alert moving forward. If you don't want to be spoiled about Fall of the House of Usher, please stop listening. Sorry.
And go watch and then come back.
But let me just tell you that you shouldn't worry about spoilers because it's not about that. Spoilers. It's like it constructs itself like this is a Shakespearean and we're going to tell you right at the beginning, these are all the characters that are going to die. So,
but people might not want to know like how they die because like how they die is the fun.
But the thing, go ahead with give away what you were going to give away, Al.
The thing I want to spoil is that it's, I guess, Satan who is behind the whole.
I didn't read it that way at all.
Well,
right. It's some kind of
somebody who makes a deal for your soul, basically.
It's a Mephistophelian entity.
I didn't read it like that way at all.
It is Mephistopheles. He's also adapted Faust as the like meta-narrative.
I got the impression that being, now this is a huge spoiler actually, because this is not revealed until the very end, because that being was not evil or anything. It was a fact of reality. It was just, so when, what's his name? He played Luke Skywalker. What's his name?
Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill, yeah.
When Mark Hamill sat down with that being and talked to them, they just had a conversation. And when Mark Hamill made his decision, the being was like, okay, I respect that. You know, I'm going to let you deal with that consequence of who you are. It was like, I'm going to get you or anything like that. It was very matter of fact.
That's why it's Satan and not death, because you don't get to say no to death. Like, Satan offers you a deal and you take it or not.
Let me make an argument here.
Maybe you're right.
The evil that was done, the evil was done is not the maliciousness which the being decided to kill some but not others, and was compassionate to the granddaughter in the manner of death and said, I would have been compassionate with you, but you're such a bastard. That there is a moralistic quality. The evil is in, I'm going to make this deal with you so you get to do whatever you want. I'm giving you the ring of Gyges, and I know that probably that you're going to be able to wreak havoc on the world. So it's not like, I'm just giving you your free will. It's no, I'm going to give you a consequence free. So really the being is the one who's responsible for, putting someone in a state of temptation that they know, and apparently doing this repeatedly with rich people throughout history in a situation where they will do untold damage upon the world.
And also, she gives them a choice. Roderick seems like the most evil. I think he's even more evil than Madeline because he already has a kid at this point. Is he dense if he doesn't get what the terms are, that you're ending your bloodline? Like, that is it. The fact that he agrees to that means he is the purest evil of them all. But I was listening to a podcast and somebody raised the question of whether this show is asking if evil is inherent as being part of a human being, or if it's something external, if it's something that comes at us from the outside and tempts us, or is it a combo platter?
I read this as it being part of humanity and part of because for me, the real evil in this story is greed. Like, that is greed and hubris. Maybe Al is kind of changing me here. I didn't read that being as the devil, because when I think of the devil, I think of like an evil being who's behind the scenes manically thinking of how bad to get people. Maybe this is a version of the devil that's being presented, but the real evil of this is really the greed of, I guess, Roderick. Maybe his sister as well, but really Roderick. That's really what the greed is. That's really what the evil comes from his decisions, and everything that happens is a byproduct of what he decides. That's how I read the story.
So that was already within him.
It was him. It was him.
I think Sarahlyn was onto it when you brought up the idea of consequences, and it seemed like, Lawrence, earlier you brought up the fact that this is clearly inspired by his anger at Purdue and the pharmaceutical industry generally. And it really makes sense that the main thing that he wanted to take aim at is the idea of not just like people acting badly, but people acting badly who have got themselves in a position where they can do so without consequences. That's brought up like
Mark said that
right at the beginning of the show in the courtroom. Who's the prosecutor? I can't remember his name. He's like, these people never have to face any consequences, and it comes up in a lot of the episodes. Like Prospero's orgy is all about like consequence-free pleasure. And yeah, it comes up over and over again.
Consequence-free until I blackmail you about it.
Yes, exactly. But no consequences for him.
The prosecutor, Dupin, who is like the Sherlock Holmes sort of character.
Yeah.
Which is a weird juxtaposition because he's not doing anything Sherlock Holmes-y, or like he's not the Dupin character whatsoever. It's just an Easter egg name.
When in the past, in 1979, he's able to go through and figure out what their lifestyle is by all of the hints that he sees, like, the coffee and the honey on the floor and all that kind of stuff. He's able to, the crying baby, he's able to figure out what their deal is.
And he's played by the great Carl Lumbly, a wonderful, wonderful actor that I was really happy to see him in this role.
There are multiple aspects to Poe. He's, of course, best known for this gloomy stuff and The Raven and House of Usher, but then throwing in the Dupin stuff, which is really a separate genre. Like he is, one of the creators.
It's the first detective story, first American detective story.
Yeah. And Arthur Pym, the name that the Mark Hamill character has, is referred to this. It's a very sort of it's a high seas adventure story of somebody being, I don't know if you guys ever read this one. It's not very commonly experienced, but yeah, it's somebody, they refer to it like going to the Arctic and there's a issue and they end up eating each other. Something that's very out of genre for Poe. So feeling the need to we're at least going to refer to that. We're going to try to build it into the same Poe verse here.
Mm-hmm.
It was an interesting choice.
What do you think of the fact that Verna lets everyone basically be responsible for their own deaths, like all of the kids be responsible in a way for their own deaths, except for Lenore at the very end? Did you notice that?
I didn't pick up on that at all.
That was the whole point, that she was the only one that was guiltless. And so she got a consolation, significant spoiler, but like a consolation prize of, I still have to kill you, but it won't be as nasty as everybody else. And in fact, I'll try to make you feel better about your life before I do.
But she doesn't actively kill each of the other kids, right? Like she basically lets them set themselves up for these gruesome deaths. And yes, she gives Lenore a much nicer death, but she is the one who puts her hand on her and she goes.
I didn't read much into that. I honestly didn't see much.
Yeah. I don't think it's really easy to pin causality on something which is like the end of a demonic pact. Like it was there. I got stuck in a thinking loop when you brought up that comment from the podcaster about like, whether the issue is about the idea that the TV shows are exploring, like whether the nature of evil is internal or external. One of the points of the show might be is that it just kind of doesn't matter. If you think about the original stories that Poe's telling as well, especially the stories of his which end in people like going mad and usually dying, which is probably most of them. One of the common themes is that there is always something real which is happening to the characters, or it feels in the story like these are real things that are happening. But these are also things which, if those characters were to tell other people that those things had happened, they would sound insane. And like sometimes they're found ranting at the end about these things that have happened. I think a similar kind of issue arises if we're talking about the internal or the external impetus for these characters' downfall. Because yes, it was Prospero's decision to hold a party and not thoroughly check everything, but he was also fated to die because of the bargain that had been struck. It's everybody's fault and nobody's fault. I don't think the stories are about who's at fault. I think they're about what it is to fall from grace, to lose your place in the world all at once. I don't know. What are the stories about?
I like the fact that for the party death that the father held himself legally responsible because like he set up the situation in which there were these chemicals there and they were stored illegally and blah, blah, blah. And I sort of wish that they just put a little more of the writing effort into trying to make that across the board. So he really could hold himself not just responsible for, I don't know, talking in a bar of like, would you be willing to give, like, that's just a bullshit session. I don't see that as like, and now sign this in blood. Like nobody would actually, if you were in that situation, you would not actually believe that you had made a real bargain. So in some extent, even though, yes, it's his own greed, it's their own, the fact that they were willing to, in the abstract, not just say, of course I wouldn't do anything and let my kids get killed, or my nieces get killed. But that's like a pretty minor thing. So that doesn't show their deep venality. It's what they actually do based on that.
I don't know, man. If I'm in a bar on New Year's Eve and a being says, sell your soul, I'm not fucking selling my soul, dog. Like, I'm just not doing it. And then once it's over, I realize it's like something supernatural happened. This is a conceit that happens in many stories that are adjacent to Edgar Allan Poe, where characters like make these kinds of deals. And I felt that was very consistent with just like, it's not playing by the rules of 2023 storytelling. It's playing by the rules of a different kind of storytelling. And it was very consistent with what those kind of stories would do. Like around the time Edgar Allan Poe was writing, there's a lot of stories like that of people selling their souls and whatnot, and kind of these kind of bargains that are happening. And that felt very consistent with the kind of story that he wanted to tell. But me personally, if I'm in a bar and some woman comes to me and is like, yo, would you be interesting to sell your soul for all this money and all your kids would die one day? Fuck no. Get away from me. I don't care how drunk or high I am. I'm not going to agree to that bargain. And so I'm sorry. I hold Roderick to be very culpable in this. And though he's not directly responsible for all the deaths, he is indirectly responsible for all the deaths because he sets the conditions for them to have the money, for them to Like, so for example, in the Telltale Heart, he gives her the money and he kind of gives her the ability to do what she's doing. Now, he needs it for his own health reasons, but he kind of sets the stage for what happened. Mm-hmm. I think that he is culpable.
Yes.
In all of these.
Yes, they make it clear by setting the kids against each other, both in general for its affection and in this specific situation of there's a mole among you and you got to figure out like that directly set up some of the deaths. The cat one, not so much. It's more just
the cat one, not so much. You're right about
it's more just the general, just like the being said, you can be unrestrained and have no consequences. This was set up to, hey, you'll be able to do whatever you want for your kids. It's just reinforcing the point that we should all be familiar with is that if that means that you give your kids no consequences, then yeah, you might have a kid that is going to abuse drugs and die as a result.
The cat one to a lesser extent because he was only able to get the replacement cat because he had infinite resources. Mm-hmm. The show does feel the need, like right at the very end, to have Roderick Usher just sit in the middle of the frame and say, it is all my fault. And even if none of this had happened, I always knew that I was going to become powerful by murdering people. So, yeah, there isn't really any question that Roderick Usher is the bad guy.
No. And she also said at the end that it's not about selling your soul. She was like, that's child's play. It's about legacy. It's about you are ending your bloodline. And I thought, the biggest gift that she gave Lenore at the end was telling her what her legacy was. And that is something that I think Roderick, and Madeline were both hoping that they could buy with money.
Consequences, again, is another kind of consequences. Whenever the show talks about consequences and uses the word consequences, it's like things that you need to avoid when you're trying to get away with venal behavior. But legacy is another kind of consequence, right?
Yeah, totally.
I want to talk a little bit about what I appreciated from this show, though. So one of the things that I really appreciated, and it might have creeped you out if you noticed it, or you might have missed it completely, but oftentimes there's a couple of things, actually. First of all, one thing that you might not know, they had to change Roderick, the actor who's playing Roderick, like in the middle of shooting the show.
Yes.
Because there was all kinds of drama around another character. Another actor. I'm not going to get into the depths of that.
Frank Langella. Anyway.
Yeah. They had to change it midstream. So I thought they did a really admirable job of kind of reshooting everything around that because they had already started shooting and then they had to change it. So I thought that was really well done. But one of the things that I appreciate about the filmmaking is that whenever Roderick is sitting down with, what's the character? Carl Lumbly, the black guy. What's his name?
Dupont.
When they were sitting down in that room and they were having conversations, oftentimes behind Dupont, there would be like ghosts behind him, right? Moving around. It was really creepy. And I loved how it was incredibly creepy and really Halloween inducing without being like jump scares all the time. Like that's one thing that Mike Flanagan does a really good job of.
Yeah, it was super creepy.
Creating an atmosphere of dread and creepiness without jump scares. One of the things that I think that horror filmmakers have really kind of relied upon too much here recently are a whole bunch of jump scares. If you look at the really good horror films of the past, Halloween, The Exorcist, whatever, it's all about dread. It's all about making things feel uncomfortable and unsettled. Like The Shining, it's all about making you feel uncomfortable and unsettled. Mike Flanagan is really good at doing that without relying on... Now, there's a few jump scares. There
are plenty of jump scares. Are you kidding?
It's one or two.
A ghost appears right in front of, that kind of...
It's not that many. It's not that many. Not as many as it could have been. It's really good at creating like an atmosphere of dread, and I really appreciated what Mike Flanagan was up to with that.
Felt like the things that he was reveling in more than jump scares were gore and like gore moments.
It was very gory. It was much gorier than he.
Those were very effective, but also felt really earned, not gratuitous. You got like a couple of big ones every episode, and it always felt needed.
Yeah,
and also over the top enough that it was still fun. Your mileage will vary though, because my girlfriend did not get on with the skin melting orgy.
Yeah.
That was.
I thought that was fun.
You know what though? The Goldbug episode, that death actually I thought was kind of spectacular with all of the glass, and there were some hints of William Wilson in there, and that was really fun. not fun, but
Sure. No, it's supposed to be fun. It's a fun show.
It was
pretty
fun. Come on,
spectacular.
Sarah. It was fun. Like, I'm not a big gore fan. Like, so last night I watched 2 movies that I'm never going to watch again. I watched a movie called All Hallows Eve on Shudder, and I watched The Terrifier Part 1 on Shudder. And those are like, All Hallows Eve introduces like this creepy clown character, and The Terrifier like really goes to a whole other place. And they have a lot of gore in those movies, and I didn't like that. I'm not a big gore fan. I didn't like that. But I think that Mike Flanagan is so restrained in how he does utilize gore that he cuts away. Like, he'll show you a flash or something, but then he'll cut away. But then at times he'll let you to like linger on what happened, but it won't be over the top gratuitous gore. That's kind of what I appreciate. Mike Flanagan is really good at not going over the top, but at the same time giving you just a little bit that you need. Sarah, it's okay. You had fun. Enjoy yourself.
The thing that did sort of worry me, I've complained on this podcast a number of times about the show American Horror Story, which despite the fact that I've complained about it, I watched 8 seasons of it, a bunch of seasons of it.
Yeah.
So clearly it was good enough, but I find it is
far more than
it
I
is
did.
trashy. And I found Usher pretty damn close because, it has a lot of characters acting poorly and taking drugs and this mixing, whereas most of the other Flanagan stuff really develops one idea. The one idea that they had to develop, which is this sort of like, you've made a deal. I mean, that's not even in Poe, right? That's just, as you were saying, Lawrence, it's something that was of the time, Devil at the Crossroads or whatever, but like, there's not a specific Poe story, I believe, that even comes from.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I'm just wondering if I can see this as a high point in art while at the same point seeing American Horror Story, which is a lot of similar. Like, one thing that was fun about this is seeing the same actors that were in Midnight Mass, that were in Haunting of Bly Manor, in these different Henry Thomas, who played the kid from E.T., play
I know.
a coke
I
addict.
love that.
Like, that's
He's having so much fun.
hilarious.
You know,
I didn't spot that.
I think American Horror Story, they're intentionally gore. Like, I'm not gore. They're intentionally like low
the gore is
brow.
part of it. Yes, campy.
campy.
It is, but it's campy. It's intentionally low brow. Like, it's not very sophisticated. That's kind of how I think there may be 2 seasons of that show that I kind of felt was like high art-ish, but it's not trying to that. Mike Flanagan is trying to be high art.
That's
Now,
what I'm concerned. Like, did it actually work?
I think it did. I think Mike Flanagan's pretty good at this. Like, consistently, I didn't love his Midnight Club show that came out last year. I didn't love that. But pretty consistently, Mike Flanagan is really good at telling compelling, highbrow, artistic horror tales.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Hill House, top notch. Bly Manor, it was a little slow for me, but it's really top notch. Midnight Mass, by far the best. Midnight Club, didn't love it. It's a little kiddie for me. And then there's this one. And his production design is always good. The effects, that when he uses them, they're always good. The cinematography is always good. It's always top notch as far as the direction and the pacing and the acting. I think that this is leaps and bounds above what Ryan Murphy is doing with American Horror Story and American Horror Stories. I really think so.
Tonally, I didn't think he was consistent in this series. I thought that sometimes it kind of veered into camp. I thought Mary McDonald was kind of hilarious as Madeline and seemed to be playing a different character than the one who played her younger self.
Yeah, you wouldn't just grow into that accent. I didn't buy
It took me
either.
so long.
I will
It took
agree
me
with
so
that.
long
I
to
will
figure
agree
out
with
they were even supposed to be the same person.
And when I hear about something like Frank Langella, like, at least Frank Langella just looks like an old man who you would not recognize what he looked like young, whereas Bruce Greenwood is a really good-looking old guy, and he doesn't look like the young version of himself. Sorry.
Right. No, he doesn't. But I also think that gothic is really hard tonally to get right on screen.
You're right.
You know, that kind of gloom and doom is tough not to kind of veer into camp sometimes.
So I think it would have done better to stick with the campier stuff that it started with towards the beginning of the season, because by the end, it seemed to me like the last 3 episodes got really into much darker kind of tonal territory. And one of the consequences of that was like at the very, very end, when we had like the resurrected body of that character strangling Roderick Usher to death with the stones over her eyes, which is just absurd on the screen. I was laughing out loud. And it just was a really weird tone shift because it had been very, very worthy. I think that the worst thing in the show for me was when they had to speechifying at the end, where they had several characters sit down and say, just in case you missed it, these are the underlying themes of the show that we've just been doing for the...
I do hate when that happens. I do hate when that happens.
That was so unnecessary.
A lot of monologue.
But I do think that Sarah is onto something, that Gothic is really hard to do well. It's really hard to be consistent, especially over this long of a time. Like, so I reminded, like, Crimson Peak, that film that came out a couple of years ago, has really good actors in it, directed by Guillermo del Toro, and that's attempting to be like a Gothic love tale. And the reason why that works is because it's 2 hours. This, you have many hours to fill, and it's really hard to keep that tone consistently. Now, I do think that he does a pretty good job of this, but it's not as good as Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass is on a whole nother level. But this does a pretty good job of like being a little campy, having a little fun, because I was laughing as well with the woman with the stones over her eyes. I mean, I was laughing. I thought it was meant to be fun. I don't think it's supposed to be terrifying. So it's a little campy, but at the same time, he tries to play with that Gothic tone. I think he does a pretty good job.
He did put it on hard mode for himself, though, because if the job is adapt Tales of Mystery and Imagination, you don't have to string them all together in a grand narrative. You could have just done it as an anthology show, and then it would have been much easier. Then you can have different tones for different episodes if you like, and it doesn't feel weird. So maybe he just made it too hard for himself.
And as Sarah said, it was a big swing. He took a really big swing. You do something like this, you're not going to hit it out the park all the time. I'm really happy that he tried, though.
You know, me too. I was too. I was excited about watching the show and getting into it. And then also getting out my Norton anthology again was really fun.
The tones worked overall for me. I wonder if essential to a Gothic thing is that you actually put it in a Gothic time period, that I kind of had to think.
It might be. That's a good point.
And any flashbacking, it kind of makes it easier. That flashing back to the 70s is not the same as flashing back to the 1870s, but yet you still have a sense of displacement. And so we're talking about the Haunting of Hill House or whatever. I know those also take place in present time, but since it's been a few years since I watched those, my memory is of here's an isolated place. Like all the other Mike Flanagan stuff, it's like, here's an isolated place, a place out of time. So this was the first one that was like actively, we're dealing with mass media. We're dealing with current events. We're dealing with all this stuff. We're bringing up Donald Trump. We're, such that it made it harder to sustain. I think that's what you're saying, Lawrence, is, how do you do a Gothic tone? Maybe don't have it in modern day. Or if you're going to have it in modern day, have it in a spooky castle that's on the edge of things. Don't make the house. I don't know. What did you guys think of that? Let's make it a dilapidated suburban 1980s house, 70s house.
The house imagery in Poe has always stood in as the symbol of the self or of the mind. That's sort of typical. And so the fact that he is in Fall of the House of Usher story, he is literally sick and he's also spiritually sick. And I wish that Mike Flanagan had taken some of those themes, because you can say that we have a sick society that says it's okay to have billionaires kind of run society. You know what I mean? Like you can actually stretch those kinds of themes that they were talking about in Andrew Jackson time and stretch them out to today. And I wish that he had kind of hit that a little bit harder, that there's more of a reflection of us in these stories than actually what we saw on the screen, because I was relieved. I didn't relate to any of these characters. They were not particularly likable, and you could kind of pat yourself on the back, as you would at the very end and saying, yeah, I'm just fine with my happy family and my partner. And, as he was saying, my grandchildren and I'm richer than anybody else, and that's kind of what we're supposed to be saying to ourselves. But I didn't think that ending in any way was earned, because there was no sense of culpability from the beginning, no sense of communal culpability that you would find actually in the short stories by Poe. He's saying a lot about the society at the time.
I'm not sure how you could have a story where the main character's greed and actions are motivated by capitalism, basically, and the unfairness and the crony capitalism, and not say that, clearly this is an indictment of the society, and the fact that we are shooting to give a life for your kids that is unrestrained, but yet this is what would happen if you actually give your kids a life that's unrestrained. That shows that there is something wrong with the public morals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't.
But I felt like there was more of that in a show like Succession, like, oh God, how did we let these people run the world and tell us what to think? And I didn't get that from this show.
No, I didn't get this from this show. And I think that many people have tried to say, like, this is a spooky Succession. And this show is just not working on that level. Because that show does make me think to myself, man, I'm kind of culpable in allowing this to happen and to buy the things that I buy and want the things that I want. I feel a little culpable in that. This one, not so much, and I think that the filmmakers are intentionally saying to us, these people are really bad people. These people are not something that you can relate to, because I think that he's really angry about the Purdue situation. I really think that's what's driving him. And since he's very angry about that, he doesn't want us to relate to them. He wants us to be angry about them and to joy whenever they meet their untimely demise or their timely demise, depending upon how you read that. And I think that that's okay. I like the show that I got. It could have been better.
I don't know that it could have been better having the scope of we have to have all these characters and have them all die and using different short stories. I don't think you could have had some Succession level drama given that framework. Like Midnight Mass can have that because it has much more modest aims, because it has fewer characters and we're really focused and very little happens to them. It's sort of just kind of one extended event that is happening to them over a period of a month or two or whatever that happens in that show. And I'm not going to spoil that show because it is definitely...
I'm also going to disagree with you. A lot happens in that show, sir. I'm sorry. A lot happens in that. It is one event over a month, but a lot. Come on, dog. Like, Sarah hasn't seen it. We're not going to spoil it for her.
Should I see it? Should I watch it?
Yes,
you should definitely watch it.
Midnight Mass is really good. Matter of fact, Sarah, when you watch Midnight Mass, I want you to text me. That is how good that show is. I'm dead serious. That show is really, really good. It is by far one of my favorite horror TV shows of all time. It is really good.
I'll just say it takes a meditative approach to treating the psychology of the main characters, such that you can see where they're coming from. You can see where they're going wrong. You can see why they make the choices they make. You can identify with them. And that's just what drama is, right? That's why Logan Roy, all the Roys, they give you enough that even though they're despicable, you still are supposed to feel enough for them that you actually care about watching their antics for this long. Mm-hmm. And you would not care if we had, more about the home life of Henry Thomas and his wife and his daughter, Lenore. It's a very barren, nobody can actually relate to each other. Nobody has real relationships, it seems. So,
but we got the origin story for Roderick and Madeline. Like, we knew where her mother was coming from, and we were supposed to sympathize with them from the beginning when they were kids, but that absolutely did not extend to any other part of their lives. She just seemed, Madeline in the 70s just seemed like just a ball of anger, just a ball of rage. That's just what she was.
Thinking back on this show, maybe the fact that those kids were raised in privilege, maybe we're not supposed to be sympathetic to them. Maybe we're supposed to look at them as spoiled brats and terrible human beings. And Roderick and Madeline were the only two quasi-normal ones there for a while. But the kids have never known a normal life. They've only had privilege. They've only had excess. And they were all kind of rotten to the core in their own individual kind of way. Maybe that was the whole point, to let us know that these people are not good people, no matter what, because of the lifestyle that they enjoy.
But that's a big leap to say, because you've been raised extraordinarily privileged, you're an asshole. You're just destined to be an asshole. And I don't know.
Isn't that the whole idea of Succession? Isn't that exactly what Succession's doing?
Succession is doing that, but it does it very well. I don't see how it just seems like these kids, I have no idea where these kids are coming from. And a lot of them didn't even know that Roderick was their father until later, until just a few years ago. Like, wasn't Prospero, he just learned that Roderick was his father. I don't know how he was raised otherwise. He was a little shit. I mean, and he was also young too. Like that was the character I felt maybe the most sympathy for, which was just a tiny amount. He didn't even seem to get a chance to grow up at all. He was barely out of teenagehood.
All right, let's put this one to bed. Thanks for listening. I mean, unless you guys have any final thoughts or other recommendations. I mean, we've already said Midnight Mass and stuff like that, but
I would definitely recommend people watch Midnight Mass. I think that The Haunting of Hill House, I didn't love The Haunting of Bly Manor. That was a little too slow for me, too meditative. But The Haunting of Hill House is a banger. It is a really, really good show. And also, I think watching things like Crimson Peak, watching The Haunting, the 1960 film, like those kinds of things are very adjacent to what Mike Flanagan is trying to do here. A very stately, haunting kind of story, gothic story that has a little bit of fun, but also something on its mind. Those are the kind of things that I would advise people to watch.
Yes, I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I watched Fall of the House of Usher.
Two horror things, Sarah. You watched The Exorcist and you watched this. I mean, Sarah, I'm having a little bit of an influence on you, just a little bit.
Well, I'm a big Poe fan, as you know. So it was fun for me to find all the Easter eggs, or at least find some of them.
Well, that means that you are predisposed for liking horror, and you are missing out on a lot of joy in your life because you're not watching more horror films.
I just don't want to be scared.
You clearly like horror stuff. You just don't like being scared.
I don't like being scared. Nope.
all right, well, let's continue on that line and trying to brainwash Sarah in the after talk, if you guys have a few minutes.
Perfect.
And I have been putting the after talk on the Pretty Much Pop feed, so you can hear it publicly. If you are just listening to this on the Partially Examined live feed, go actually subscribe to Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com or any of the links, or just look us up on the stream service of your choice, and you'll be able to hear that. Oh, what we're about to record right now. So long.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Get more Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com. Get bonus content for every episode at patreon.com/prettymuchpop.